today's tutorial, I'm going to show you some of the basics of knitting. Hi friends, welcome back to So Obvious. I'm Apolinar. In my last video, I taught you some of the basics of crocheting. Now I'm going to teach you some of the basics of knitting. Specifically how to cast on, how to do a knit stitch, and how to do a purl stitch. Like I said in my previous video, I personally prefer knitting over crocheting just because it is a lot easier to control it. However, when you make mistakes in knitting, it is a lot harder to fix them than if you were to make a mistake in crocheting. Because in knitting, you work with many stitches on the needles at once, whereas with crocheting, you work with just one stitch on the hook, and that's it. The reason why I really love knitting is that these needles could double as weapons. So if you're ever like knitting and you get really frustrated because you suck at it, you can just take out your frustration on like the nearest pillow or wall or person. And on that note, let's get started. So let's start off with casting on. I'm going to show you guys what's called a long tail cast on. I'm going to measure out about a foot, and once I have that measurement of where the foot ends, I'm going to make a slip knot like I taught you in our last video. So there we go, we've got the slip knot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the needle, one of the needles through the slip knot and tighten it up a little bit. You don't want to tighten up too much because then it'll be hard to get the knitting started. So I got the slip knot on this needle with this hand. With my other hand, what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the two strings like this and create kind of like a diamond. You see I'm separating them up here, but then bringing them back together down here. I'm going to pull this part down so that it kind of becomes like a V. Then is when we're actually going to start casting off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tip of the needle, go underneath the string that's on the outside of my thumb, come across this way and go underneath this one here. I got this string here and the one over my thumb. What I do is I let go of the one on my thumb and then tighten it up a little bit. And now we've got two stitches. So we're going to do it again. We're going to separate them, but then use our two bottom fingers to bring them back together to create that diamond. Now we're going to pull this down, go underneath this string, bring it over underneath this string, and then let go and tighten. Now we've got three. You're going to complete this step until you have however many stitches you need. I'm going to cast on 10. So here I have my 10 stitches. Now over here I've got two strings. I got this one that's connected to the actual yarn, and this one that's just little end tail. Now this one, I wouldn't recommend cutting it because you can actually kind of thread it through a needle and weave it into your work later on so that it doesn't unravel. Now we're going to pick up our other needle and we're actually going to start our knitting. Keep in mind that I am left-handed, so I'm doing everything left-handed. And if you're right-handed, then you should be doing it opposite ways. I thought about spending the time learning how to do this right-handed to make it easier for you guys. But then I realized that I've spent my whole life learning how to adapt to a right-handed world, so you can struggle for 10 minutes. So back to knitting. Okay, so to get started with the actual knitting, what we are essentially going to do is knit another row, but as we're doing each stitch, we are moving it over to this needle. And then on the next round, we're going to move it over to this needle, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What we do is we're going to take this needle point, go through the bottom of the stitch into the back. And once we have this needle in the back, we're going to take the tail that is connected to the yarn wrap it around, and then pull it back with us. Once you have it here, you can slide it off this needle over here. So once again, we're going to go through the loop towards the back, wrap around, bring it to the front. Stitch 3, through the loop towards the back, wrap this around, pull it to the front and off. One thing that I've learned just from knitting through the years is that this first row that we're working on right now is probably going to be the toughest because it is so tightly cast on. And that's just something that you kind of have to work through. And that's our first row. You'll notice after this first row that we just finished that it is going to be a lot easier. It's not going to be as tight. So be careful because you don't want to let the fact that it's a little bit looser let you drop some of the stitches off the needle. So now that we're ready to move on to our next row, what we're going to do is we're going to move this needle over here, and then we're going to put our other needle on this hand. And we are again just going to continue stitching. Go through the back, wrap around, pull it forward, and off. And here you can see each row of knit adds these little bumps right here. So that is the knit stitch. Now I'm going to show you how to do the purl stitch. The purl stitch is pretty much the same thing as the knit stitch, except that instead of putting our needle from the front to the back, we are going to put it from the back to the front, which means that we have to make sure that this yarn is on the front of our work. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to do what we need to do. So, I'm going to start with the first stitch. We're going to go in from the back to the front. We're going to take our yarn, wrap it around, and then pull it towards the back and off the needle. So again, from the back of the work to the front, wrap it around, pull it towards the back, and off. And that is the purl stitch. And that's the purl stitch. If you look very closely on this side, you can see that we have all these little V's going up and down right here. That is called a stockinette stitch, and that's what happens when you do a knit stitch, and then on your next row you turn around and you do a purl stitch. Then on the next row you do a knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And that creates a stockinette stitch, which is the pattern that most garments that we wear that are knitted are made in. So that is the basics of knitting, how to knit, purl, and cast on. If you guys want to, I will make a video in the future on how to cast off your work so that when you take it off the needle, it doesn't do this. And then you lose all your work. So sad. If you like today's video, make sure that you like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. You can also follow me on Instagram on @apollylook. There I will post some of my upcoming projects and any other videos that I'll be posting on here. If you didn't like the video, then I just want to remind you that I have these very pointy needles. That's it. Okay, bye.